And also, though, also for those of you who I'm thanking all of you for persisting to come to this class. The topic of this class, although I've been trying to make it accessible, is I'm going to speak for myself, is challenging. It's always been challenging for me through years of trying to partake in understanding and then meditative practices that can lead to a clearer understanding of how things really work. And through that, bring forth a different experience in day-to-day life in the ways that we've been talking about the last couple of sessions. So so I really appreciate those of you who have been sticking with it, because it could get kind of like, why are we even talking about this, you know? So what's my motivation for this? So that's partly why at the beginning of each one of these sessions, I try to refocus on that aspect of like, why are we even doing this course? So I'm going to do that again today. So let me jump into it. And then of course, along the way, further us in the process of what we're exploring. So for any of you who have your mic not muted, just try to mute your mic for now. And then as we get to wanting to take some questions, you know, you can do that through the chat function, or, you know, you could do it when, you know, over Zoom as we get to that. And we'll get to that today. So bear with me. So I'll start the session again, like I did last session, where I talk about the inspiration for this course coming from George Harrison's song, I, Me, Mine. Harrison starts by saying, everything you see and do and touch and smell isn't real. And then further, he talks about how he was able to experience how things really are when he had his LSD experience. And we talked last time about how that's one way to get a glimpse at something that might be tapping how things really are, or the true nature of reality, as Harrison calls it. But it's random. Depends on who you are. Depends on what your predispositions are. Depends on what your ripening karma is in terms of what you might experience on a hallucinogenic. And there's tons of studies about that. And so one of the things that these kinds of practices that we're exploring here today are all about, it's an organized way, proven over centuries of practice, to explore the same topic that Harrison explores in his song, I, Me, Mine, and his experience of I, Me, My that he talks about in his autobiography. But the part of of what he talked about that I used in my opener for this course that I want to focus on just for a few minutes is the quote where he talked about how he was able to see everything being his, being mine, being of coming from him, everything he experienced. And then he further experienced how that was a mistake, that it was false, that it was impermanent. I'm using his words, not putting words in his mouth. And he used an English expression, it drove me crackers. Like, it just really drove him, you know, bonkers, you know, to use another expression we use here in the States. Why did it do that? And what was he really seeing? So it's clear that we understand, after going through the first couple of sessions and also tuning in to me rambling a bit about what Mr. Harrison actually meant in some of these quotes that I used to springboard us into our course, that he had an experience. He didn't just have an experience, though, of how things really are. He had an experience of, like, in a flash, of everything about what he called his ego, and seeing it the way that he's always seen it. Get this, the way he's always seen it, but that it was false, that it was a mistake. So, you know, over the last couple of courses, I've tried to catapult us into that topic of, like, well, what does that really mean? What is he really seeing? We did some meditations on the self, the concept of self, in relationship to the five aggregates. We're going to stick with that. But for us, it's a little bit jumping ahead, actually, in terms of me having done that over the last couple of courses. And what I'm talking about is what we're going to really focus on in this session and the next session is a very, very organized way, again, going back almost 2,000 years, never mind hundreds of years, to a specific meditation practice done by a Buddhist master named Master Chandrakirti, called the sevenfold reasoning. We'll get to that in a few minutes. And I've talked about that a little bit last week when we touched on this. But I'm going to quote from Chandrakirti in his sevenfold reasoning document, his treatise, as they call it in scripture. He says, a yogi, he's really talking about someone who's addressing themselves to trying to look at this topic. So all of you, and I'm not saying this lightly, should really think of yourselves as yogis, because partaking in the process of yoga and being a yogi, meditatively speaking, is engaging in topics like this. And so you are practicing yoga, because the end goal of yoga means to bring into union that which is dual in our experience. And it is where you find ultimate reality that Harrison talks about. So when I use the word yogi, I'm not talking about somebody else. I'm talking about us. Of course, if you're, not following through and doing the meditative practices, then maybe you don't want to think of yourself as a yogi. But a yogi has to start somewhere. So being a beginner is totally fine. So here's the quote from Chandrakirti. A yogi sees in his mind that the afflictions, we talked a bit about that last time when I talked about the mental afflictions, the mental states of mind and where they come from, when we took a look at the wheel of life. And we'll go back and look at that for a few minutes because it's really important. But let me finish the quote. A yogi sees in his mind that the afflictions and the faults arise from the false view of a transitory collection. He's talking about the five aggregates there. So you're familiar with that. That shouldn't sound too like what, He continues and says, having understood that the object of this is self, he negates self. So I'm going to focus in for a moment on the part of the quote that says, having understood that the object of this, meaning of him having, him seeing in his mind the afflictions and faults, not being the cause, I should say, of seeing the self incorrectly, moment by moment, is understood through the object of looking at the self. So, the last couple of weeks, I've been engaging us in trying to negate the self in the sense of trying to find the self in the five aggregates, in the five meditation practices, and in my, my course narrative. So one of the things that we want to do is we're going to back up, so to speak, and we're going to do meditation this morning, closer to the beginning of the course here, that tries to explore purposely, tapping into finding that self, the self that we've always have conceived as a sense of self, inherently existing self, to use that expression you've heard me use in this course. So that's really kind of where we're headed. But I want to read you one other quote, a quote by another Buddhist master named Jason Kappa. And this is from his commentary on Illumination of the Thought. A yogi desiring to engage in reality, which is what Mr. Harrison's imploring us to do, desiring to remove all the faults, which are the afflictions. Sound familiar? We talked about that in Chandrakirti's quote. Now analyzes. That's the meditation type of practice we're doing, that analytical meditation. Thinking, quote, what is the root of this wandering and suffering? When the yogi has analyzed thus, he will see in his mind that the afflictions of desire, hatred, and confusion, and so on. Those are the three poisons I showed us in last week in the Wheel of Life. Those three root mental afflictive states. And he says, and so on, because there's many more that emanate from that. And the faults of birth, aging, sickness, and death arise without exception from, here's that expression again, false view of a transitory collection, the aggregates, us interacting with the aggregates in a way where we associate ourselves with them as helping us create this sense of self versus non-self. So, and again, when he's talking about those faults of birth, aging, sickness, and death, he's talking about the 12 links of dependent origination, which are present in the Wheel of Life. So I keep mentioning the Wheel of Life, so I'm gonna do a little screen share of the Wheel of Life here. So give me a second. It's worth us taking time to look at this because some of you have seen this from previous courses, previous course I've done before, but yeah, it's important we do this. You'll see my desktop for a second, which I then have to go to well, sorry, oops, I'm clicking on the wrong item here. Let's see, it's I think they're should be under view. There we go. So hopefully you all can see this. Sorry for bouncing around there. I chose screen view because I have a couple of different screens I want to show you versus this individual one. So this is the Wheel of Life, and it's hard to see. I'll show some closer views in a graphic format in a second, but in the middle is where we see those three poisons, and they're in the middle because from those mental afflictive states that Jason Kappa just talked about come the root afflictions that occur continuously for us in the form of arising moment by moment mental states that we experience just living. That's at the heart of it. And then around that are the two semicircles of virtuous and non-virtuous activities that we can do with thought, speech, and activity. And I talked about that last week and did a bit of an in-depth jump into what that really means. How does that happen? How does that happen through the experience of karma and how karma works through the experience of those actions of body, speech, and mind taking shape in our stream of consciousness, our subtle stream of consciousness in the form of seeds or kleshas that then ripen later on and manifest. And when I'm talking about what manifests, we're talking about virtuous or non-virtuous deeds. That's it. That's the choice. So let me try to change this window to a different diagram. So here's a closer up view of those two circles in the Wheel of Life, the center being the three poisons, the pig, the rooster, and the snake representing misapprehension, which is really the main topic of our class, this class that we're doing, and how that spurs the rooster, which is desire, and the snake, which is aversion. And these are the three main experiences that we have, all seen through the lens of misapprehension or ignorance when we partake in either virtuous or non-virtuous activities in our mind stream. So this is how it relates to our daily life. And I keep talking about how do we connect this sort of theoretical stuff that I'm talking about to daily life. Well, it's in the form of like, what do we do moment by moment? That's what matters. And then nothing else really matters. If you can work with that, then it might have some meaning in terms of why you might even be here today. So then we take and go from there to looking at the next diagram, which is actually, this is a diagram of the Wheel of Life that I just showed you in a painting form. And we can see, again, if we look closely, there's the mental, the three poisons. And then the two semicircles of virtuous and non-virtuous deeds. And then what follows that are the 6 realms of existence. And that's where we live moment by moment. which realm are we in? And again, that was covered in much more detail in our last course I did last year. And that can be seen a little bit more clearly in this graphic, which talks about these realms. There's 6 of them, and puts some sort of generalized activities that happen in terms of mental afflictive states that arise. If you're experiencing violence or envy or jealousy, then you might be in a certain realm versus one of the other realms. So
I don't need nothing.
I hear
I don't
somebody,
need a damn thing.
okay, I hear somebody talking, so.
I don't need a damn thing. My
Okay,
life is over.
okay. So somebody is talking there.
I'm gonna kill myself.
All right, I apologize for that. I put everybody on mute because I can do that as a host, so I apologize. So I'll try to go back here to where we were. Sorry about that. So then the last thing that Jason Kappa was talking about in his quote, which was that process of birth, aging, sickness, and death arising, that's what we see on the outer edge of the wheel here. There's 12 links of dependent origination that start with a person walking blindly. And that relates to that misapprehension, that delusion in this graphic, or the pig that's in the center of our moment by moment experience. That's how we go about. We go about things in the sense of being like a blind person. That creates karmic activity, which I talked about last session. And then that takes form in our having conceptual thought, which is that grasping or having aversion to things. And then that leads onward into various experiences of living, of actually coming into the realms of existence, all the way through birth, and then aging, sickness, and death. And then that cycle kind of repeats itself. I mean, that's the Buddhist world of the wheel of life. So I just quickly wanted to show those to you. Again, some of you are more familiar with these than others, but they present the frame of reference of what we're talking about here in let's see, am I still sharing screen, or did I end that? I can't see. I think, okay, thank you. So basically that's the frame of reference I want us to keep remembering as we talk about this topic today. So really what is being underscored here by both these very highly evolved practitioners of these kind of practices, Chandrakirti and Jason Kappa, is that suffering that exists in our moment by moment reality are all spawned by these afflictions of misapprehending things moment by moment, in our activities. And they induce this false view of everything we experience moment by moment. And that's why we're doing these kinds of meditations. We're looking to break that pattern of experience, which is has a suffering nature to it. And it's suffering because it's misinformed. It isn't wisdom filled. It's not seeing how things really are. And that's one of the key ingredients to really being able to kind of liberate yourself from suffering experiences moment by moment. And in a grander way of looking at it, it's also in a system like yoga or a system like Buddhism, a method for attaining liberation or nirvana, where we're able to break free completely of this false view and live in that kind of a state of mind, which is really beyond the sort of conceptual state of mind. But we really won't take too much time and go there right now. So that's really what we're talking about. And that's why we're even, as I said, doing these series of meditations that we explored over these first couple of sessions. And as I said, though, before we get into further into those specific types of meditations, we need to explore in this in this session, this type of meditation practice that actually we, even knowing what we know and what we've talked about over the last couple of sessions, we're trying to do a simple meditation practice as the next meditation practice that actually puts us in touch with our false sense of self. We live in that false sense of self, as I've been talking about, but we do it non-analytically. We just do it habitually. We do it based on the predispositions of karmic ripenings that I talked about in the last session, that we have those predispositions that come from where? That virtuous and non-virtuous activity, meaning all activity that anybody can do of thought, speech, and action, that's misinformed by those three poisons, those three main mental afflictions. So, normally we just accept that we have a self, an I, or a mind. And again, we experience that in a non-analytical way every moment of our existence. So, and this is, versus the kind of analytical based experience, which are these meditations we've been doing. They get us in touch with trying to get into a different flow of how we experience moment by moment that Chandrakirti is offering up in this sevenfold reasoning type of meditations, which are what we're going to be doing through the rest of these sessions. So, so we're going to take and do a meditation now. And it's a meditation that is literally called in this system of Chandrakirti's as the first step necessary to have a frame of reference of what are we identifying, that we're even trying to say, no, that doesn't exist the way that I've always thought it existed. And simply it's identity of the self or I. We're not talking about what we've been trying to negate over the last couple of sessions, meaning we're not trying to look at non-self or self-awareness. We're actually trying to take and do a meditation that identifies that false view of the collection of aggregates, as Chandrakirti calls it. And that's what we're trying to negate in this particular, in the meditations that will follow. So it's really trying to create a really, really good frame of reference, which we all live in moment by moment. But again, we do it mindlessly, if you will, or non-analytically. And so we want to try to do it in an analytical way, be able to be aware of how we mistakenly identify ourselves with a I or mind. So we're going to do a meditation now that is called that. It's called a meditation on identifying the self. So if you all could try to just get into a comfortable position, seated, or sitting on a cushion, whatever works for you in terms of doing a meditation. Of course, you're sitting in a Zoom session, so maybe it's not ideal, but that's what we're going to do now. And, close your eyes, try to sit up straight, try to turn off your normal sort of rambling mind as it was engaged in my rambling narrative, where we had an interruption as well, and try to just quietly and comfortably focus on your physical breath entering your nostrils, moving into your lungs and abdomen, expanding your midsection, and exhaling out through your nostrils. And try to relax your body as you move each breath in and out. And try to slow your breath a bit as you're moving in and out. And further, try to feel that your breath becomes very subtle. And as you're breathing in, it moves throughout your entire body, not just into your chest and abdomen area. And it's lighter, it's thinner, it's more subtle, so that it can actually do that, radiating out to your extremities, your feet, your hands, and of course, everywhere in between from whence it enters the nostrils. Have that create a sense that's very visceral, that you can feel that subtle light breath permeating your body transforms your body into a much lighter entity. Your organs, your skin, your identifiable hardness as a physical entity becomes transparent and translucent. It becomes the same nature as your breath. And it's your breath that's the vehicle for bringing this about, as I just described. Try to relax in that for a moment. And further, if you can, try to add a quality to the sensation of your translucent body, of there being light, bright light, pure light. And the experience of that is blissful. It makes you feel warm, happy, free of cares, anxieties, any type of emotion that maybe you're feeling this morning that's distracting you or preoccupying you. Identify yourself with that light. And in that state, I'm going to take us through the meditation on identifying the self. So first, concentrate with this clear, light body and mind on the following. As you sit quietly, sense your consciousness. Maybe it's in the corner of your mind. And sense that that consciousness has the ability to watch what appears to you in the meditation. And what we're looking for, and what you want your mind to try to focus its lens on is the experience of I appearing to you, a sense of self appearing to you. And if your consciousness watches too strongly, the I will be hard to see, or it might appear quickly and just disappear. So try to relax as you're doing this, like sitting on a park bench, just watching people walk by. But the people here are your actual thoughts, and more specifically, the appearance of your own I. And try to generate this conception continuously through watching the I as if from a corner. And if one has trouble with this, one can utilize a very simple tool. You can take an incident in your own life, an incident, let's say, of false accusation. I did not do this. I am being wrongfully accused. Try to create a recollection of a false accusation that you feel viscerally, and bring up that thought of, I did not do this. I am being wrongfully accused. And then watch that eye as it arises, that accused eye. Having a firm sense of the way that the non-analytical mind normally apprehends an eye, you can now develop through this focused little corner of your consciousness, watching the eye, a real acute assertion of an eye being present in every moment of your existence. Try to avoid analyzing anything at all. Just observe. In other words, don't do any analytical meditation on how the eye might be different or the same as your aggregates. Just naturally experience the sense of eye. Another way to aid you with the tool of experiencing the eye, if you're having trouble, is to sometimes simply allow the eye to appear in terms of recognizing it as your breath. Or maybe it's your stomach moving in and out with your breath. Or maybe today you have an upset stomach. And you can say in each case, I am my breath. I am my stomach moving in and out. I have an upset stomach today. I am sick. Other tools you can use. Sometimes the eye appears to be your eyes, maybe your ears, your nose, your tongue, your body, or mental consciousness. In other words, one of the 5 aggregates. Again, you can apply the same narrative if that becomes prominent as your consciousness is looking at the eye arising in your meditation. If it takes the shape of one of those aspects, you can identify yourself with it. And there's a few words from some wonderful informed beings that can be a further aid to you as well. The 5th Dalai Lama, in his Sacred Words of Manjushri, says the following: sometimes the eye seems to be related with the body. Sometimes it seems to be related with the mind. Sometimes it seems to be related to the other individual aggregates, feelings, perceptions, compositional factors. At the end of arising of such a variety of appearance, we come to identify an I which exists in its own right, which exists inherently, which from the start is self-established as an undifferentiated from the mind and body, which are like mixing milk and water. His Holiness continues and says that this is the first essential, the ascertainment of the self, which then in further meditation becomes the object of negation. So it's very important to try to generate an experience of this self inherently existing, self-established, and identify with it in your mental continuum. When we're able to crystallize this identification of the I, conceived to be the innate conceiver, the self, in relationship to everything, including all phenomena, then this is the I that has a relationship with one's own aggregates. And this is like water poured into water. So bring yourself back to a focus on your breath. Your light moves into your physical breath, moving in and out of your nostril, that light that permeated your entire self. And then open your eyes and bring yourself back to where we are here in our session. And so this is something that the masters talk about as a type of meditation practice that, as I've already said, is really essential to establish. And it might seem a little funny to be establishing that in the sense that that becomes the object that we're negating, but stop and think about that. If everything I've been talking about in the last couple of sessions and trying to underscore for you is true to any degree, that that this sense of self is the object we need to work with in terms of negating our misapprehension of it. Well, if we can't identify it, then we're kind of operating with one hand tied behind our back. So this is the first essential. And we've already done meditations, right? We've done meditations on some of the ways that we can negate this object and experience non-self or selflessness. But as we go through the rest of this session and the next session, a more formal review and exercise of me sharing with you the sevenfold reasoning meditation practices by Chandrakirti, then they're very reliant on having a keen sense of this self, this false self. So most of the masters talk about how it's important to have this. I can go through a litany of masters that say this. What's really important is that you get a firm grasp of it. And you might want to, if you're doing these kind of meditations that we've been doing already and that we're going to continue to do through this session and next session, then, and if you feel that that object that you're looking at, that we're trying to negate, sort of sliding away in your meditations, then you want to go back to this type of meditation where in your own way, there's not a fixed way to try to create that experience of sitting in this type of meditation and just allowing that corner of your mind to see what comes across the transom of your consciousness. A little secret for you is anything that comes across the transom of your consciousness could be conceived technically as being the self, but you really want to try to maybe use some of the tools that I mentioned the one that's the most powerful is trying to create some emotional experience where it has caused you emotionally in the past. Obviously, you're tapping your memory to cling to an I. I did not do that. That's not something I would ever say. Something that really, that's the I. That's the self that we go, aha. That's that one that's misapprehendingly and apprehending how things really are. That's the one that's clinging to desires and pushing away aversion, those three poisons that are in the wheel of life that I shared with you. So it is important. Most masters say that for somebody who's not really consciously or mindfully, analytically tuned into like that sense of self, doing this kind of meditation for a week or two, maybe not doing some other ones, and then bringing in some of these other ones would be helpful. In the interest of this course that we're doing over these 2 months, where we're meeting every 2 weeks and I'm giving you some new meditations, I'm advising that you try to pepper it into the actual meditations on non-self or selflessness that we're exploring as a way to, and when you see what those meditations are, you're going to get it real quick, because if you're not keenly aware of the object of negation, the meditations will quickly just slip out of your mind. They'll be much more challenging. So that's why I'm underscoring this. So just before we continue on with the other meditations in this system, and I more formally present them, the sevenfold reasoning meditations, I just want to underscore one more time for all of us, for my benefit as well. Why does this even matter? What difference does it make talking about a self and non-self? What the hell? Why does it matter? We all have suffering. We all have happiness. We all have mental afflictive states of varying kinds, and we live with them and we work with them. That last point I just made, we work with them. Do we really work with them? Can we really work with them if we don't understand them correctly? And why would we want to work with them? So I'm going to be melodramatic for a moment. This is me being melodramatic. I'm going to say why. Here's why it matters. For each one of us and for all sentient beings, the quality of one's whole existence, every single moment, depends on this. The quality of our whole existence, every single moment, depends on it. It can be an experience every single moment of living a robust, full life, yes, with suffering and all other types of experiences that happen in anyone's life, but informed with a wisdom mind versus a non-wisdom or misapprehending mind. And that makes all the difference. If we continue to incorrectly, as it shows in the wheel of life, cling or grasp to all things, ourselves and all phenomena, which then give us a fundamental false experience of self, again, every single moment, then that false experience of self or I and mine lead to that non-informed, every moment by moment experience of having that continual arising, as it shows in the wheel of life in the 6 realms of existence, of ongoing, every single moment, continual afflictive mental states. And that's where the source of all suffering comes from. That's what Harrison's talking about, being able to become aware of. That's what the Buddha talks about in his first 2 Four Noble Truths, when he says that life is suffering. And then the second noble truth is all suffering comes from ourselves. There's varying ways that that's stated as the second noble truth, but that's essentially what it is. So this set of sessions is teaching us and then giving us some tools to tune into that second noble truth, which obviously relates to the first one, because that infers the third and fourth one. If one's able to understand the source of all suffering, the third noble truth is that the Buddha says there's an end to all suffering. And then the fourth noble truth is that he says there's an actual path to ending suffering as a sentient being living here as a human in this realm of existence. So, and that's what we're exploring here in the rest of this course, is bringing forth some of those tools and techniques developed by masters over centuries to utilize in that way. So this all boils down to trying to sort of put an end to our non-analytical, and as I talked about last session, karmically ripening thoughts, speech, and actions that happen, endlessly over and over, that lead to only one end, which is an experience of thinking that everything inherently exists and is fixed, including ourselves. And that creates that moment by moment ripening of those thoughts, dependently arising on the base of, get this, on the base of imputation, which are the aggregates. It's ourselves interacting with ourselves and all other phenomena incorrectly that lead to this false reality versus the true nature of reality that Mr. Harrison puts forth. And it's constant and it's continually created in every single moment we partake in this false dance of the interaction of karmically driven, what I talked about last session, predispositions. Keep talking about last sessions so time out here for any of you who have missed that one. I highly encourage you to go back and listen to second course. It would be very helpful, I think. So these karmically driven predispositions take form in our thoughts arising with our current experience of that base of imputation, of our aggregates of body and mind. That's why we're doing these exercises of looking at, trying to negate the self that we associate with our aggregates. And through that, there's a transformation, a liberation that can occur that allows us to partake in further practices in our lives, as I talked about last session as well, that develop compassion, which is the other wing of practice that goes with developing this wisdom mind. That is what we're really trying to do here, and engage with life moment by moment in this woken up way that will help us moment by moment by doing other types of meditation practices informed by wisdom mind to alleviate in the future, informed about how things really work with karmic, the creation of karmic predispositions, by creating virtuous karmic predispositions now. In the future, they will ripen as a much more healthy series, moment by moment, of mental states, less afflictive. And that's the medicine, and the tools are doing different types of meditative practices. So in our day-to-day reality, this solid sense and experience of self, I, or mine that we constantly feel we have to protect, protect from what? We all know the answer to that. We're trying to protect ourselves from pain and suffering, those mental afflictive states that continually arise, that we see clearly in the wheel of life. So the fundamental problem that I'm proposing is that they'll just continue to arise if we don't address identifying where they come from, and then identifying that, there's a problem with how we're experiencing reality, and then start to create new karmic predispositions that will sort of take the place, if you will, of this auto response, remove it, that constantly create that flow moment by moment of pain and suffering that we have through mental afflictive states. That's the big mistake that we all make on an ongoing basis. So we can choose to simply continue that way, or we may take time out and explore what might be worth exploring more than this, besides the fact that we all have to live. So it's important to make sure we're taking care of our life, our families, having jobs, and in the context of that, being good people. But if we could take time out to explore a set of meditation practices that would bring us to a clearer understanding of how things really work, and we could actually skillfully create karmic predispositions in our mental continuum that improves the future way we experience things, where there's less mental afflictive arisings as we interact with ourselves, mentally, emotionally, mentally, conceptually, and as well as all other beings and all other things, that might be worth it. And that's what I'm proposing to you here. And that's really the goal. So that's something to reflect on. That's something to meditate about, and think about. Is this worth doing? Because these practices take some time. It's not like taking a hallucinogenic drug, as Mr. Harrison did. Again, he had the karmic predispositions to experience those things when he took that hallucinogenic. That's very random from the point of view of, like, if all of us took LSD, we wouldn't necessarily come close to the experience that he had. I'm giving him a pat on the back in terms of him having those karmic predispositions that would ripen in that specific way for him. But that's really rolling the dice to try to have that be the way that you find these practices. And by the way, you can't find those practices through hallucinogenics because they're so temporary and not lasting, and there's no system connected to them. This is an actual system where you can have this realization become part of the fabric of your moment by moment existence. So that's why it matters. Again, if it's something that you don't want to buy into, that's fine. But I implore you, and I think you're interested in, and that's why you're here today, of exploring this at least to see if this is a set of meditation practices that could lay that kind of foundation for you. So this specific system that we're going to further explore is one where its specific goal is presenting you with methods of reflection and meditating that break down the object to be negated, the I, the self, the mind, so that there's no doubt about the false experience, if you will, of reality that creates in each of us. And in the process, you understand how things really exist. That thing Mr. Harrison talks about, the true nature of reality. And this is the basis of the path, that fourth noble truth that the Buddha talks about, of ending suffering and finding real experience. So I'm going to just quote quickly here from, again, from Jason Kappa, who says, if you understand the way in which phenomena are established in this system, he's talking about Chandrakirti's system, and get this, you should write the next 5 words down, because it's what it's all about. Merely by power of thoughts. So he's saying, if you understand the way in which phenomena are established in this system, which is merely by power of thoughts. That's why I've been spending so much time last session, and then amplifying it here, or underscoring it here, is understanding how karma works, understanding how predispositions take form in our consciousness and then ripen. Because it is about being able to work with the power of your thoughts, because phenomena is only established that way. And that's what we're going to be exploring in the rest of these sessions. But to finish the quote, merely by the power of thought, then you will easily understand the conception which is the opposite of that, the conception of true existence. So isn't Jason Kappa talking about the exact same thing that Mr. Harrison's talking about? Because that's why Mr. Harrison was imploring us to understand the false and impermanent nature of what he called the small I, and then turn to the other side of that same coin and understand how that can lead to understanding the true nature of existence. That's pretty good stuff, I think. So just one other thing to mention here that kind of goes along with that thinking conventionally in this system of meditation practices. When I say that, I'm talking about merely having something established by the power of thought. This is a classic example of how that happens. And if you take this as an example in, you can play with it and turn it into endless amount of examples as we experience things moment by moment. And here it is. The way in which phenomena are established, this is also from Jason Kappa. The way in which phenomena are established merely through the power of thought is like the way in which a snake is imputed to a rope. Just as there is no snake which can be found among the parts of the rope or as a collection of the parts of a rope, so with an eye which is imputed to the aggregates, or a chariot imputed to its parts, or you could say a car imputed to its parts. Neither the aggregates taken separately, nor the continuum of former and latter moments of the aggregate, or the collection of the aggregates are to be taken as an example of an eye. The eye exists merely imputed in dependence on the aggregates of one's own continuum. And obviously, what's kind of left out in the example is there's a supposition that's being made by Jason Kappa, which is that when one looks at a rope and mistakenly, which is what we do every moment of existence, mistakenly think that it's a snake, and therefore, what do? We cling to fear. We cling to the idea of trying to move away from that snake as quickly as possible because it might harm us. But it is only through what we impute it with that it has any self-existent or proposed self-existent reality. Of course, the snake does still function. It's not like it doesn't exist conventionally. And that's a whole nother thing we'll explore through these meditation practices. So if we've been able to establish that the eye exists the way we've always conceived it to exist, inherently fixed and permanent, that was the purpose of that meditation we just did, of identifying the self, then the next step, or the second step, as it is in this, once we've established a sense of self or I or mine, is to analyze it through what's called in this system meditative investigation. So we've already done some of this in the first 5 set of meditation practices over the course of the first 2 sessions. So hopefully some of you have done some of that additional work of working with those meditations in the in-between session periods, meaning the 2 weeks between each one of the courses. If not, I encourage you to do that. But with that, some of the following will be familiar and resonate with you. So taking the supposition that if the self or I exists in the way we normally conceive it to experience it, then the meditative investigation is all about the following 2 choices. As we investigate, we're trying to establish one of these 2, meaning we're trying to prove that the self does exist, either as the same entity as our mental and physical aggregates. And again, some of the meditations we've done have sort of shown that that's probably not the case. But we can do more of them to reinforce that, if that's what we do through our meditative investigation, actually come to the conclusion of. Or the second option is the only other option, that we can establish the self as different from those aggregates. And that's, if you think back on the 5 meditation practices we've done so far on the aggregates, that's where maybe there's some additional meditation practice that could be done or work to be done, because all of those meditation practices, as you may recall, end with a logical statement that says, so the self cannot be this aggregate, fill in the blank, emotions or perceptions, because. So, there is some more that can be done, because what's the goal? The goal is to get to a point that as you either work through these meditation practices, you don't buy into it, then you can discard it and go put it on the shelf and maybe try to find some other practices to do, or you remove all doubt that this is indeed true, that there is only non-self and there is only selflessness, which again, as I said in the first course, let's not forget, that is not nihilistic. It is not about negating an existence of the conventional self. Conventional self, me, you talking right now on Zoom, we function. We're talking, we're teaching, we're formulating questions. I hope you guys are formulating some questions. So this is really what the meditative investigation in this system boils down to. You'll see that what I share with you moving forward is all about trying to, through the meditations, either check the box that it's either the same as the mental and physical, meaning the self, mental and physical aggregates, or it is different from those. So, one might stop and say, well, are there other choices? And I propose to you that there are no other choices. It must be either the same as the aggregates, or it's got to be different. Sameness and different, and sameness and difference of entity, they're mutually exclusive. If two things exist, they must be either the same or different. So I'm putting out some statements here. If you don't agree, make a note of it and come back and challenge me on it when I'm finished with my course lecture. So I'm saying two things exist. If they exist, they must be either the same or different. There is no other option. If the I or self's found to be either inherently the same as the mind and body or different, a different entity from them, then the I does not inherently exist. And that's what we're trying to establish through inference. Sorry, that's the word, not reference. So that's what the sevenfold reasoning process does. It attempts to infer that the I does not inherently exist as it appears to, meaning inherently, as a fixed, permanent entity. So this inference can't be generated if you haven't ascertained the non-existent, the non-inherent existent, pervades or occurs with every instant of everything that exists, starting with our own aggregates. Because if you don't sort of do the thorough analysis of the aggregates, and then there's a flip side of that where you can do the thorough analysis of all phenomena, then in your mind, there might be some doubt that something out there has inherent existence. So that's why there's a whole set of these meditation practices. So in other words, you must realize that whatever is inherently neither the same entity as, nor a different entity from its basis of designation, meaning the aggregates, when we talk about the self, then it does not inherently exist. So that's what I'm contending here, everyone. So again, like you have to come to a firm conclusion of this, and that there's no third possibility of concrete or inherently self-existing existence. When one does this, one begins to do that, create that doubt, that existence of the self, of the existence of the self, in much the same way that one starts to doubt an old friend. And we put it that way traditionally because that old friend is the way we habitually experience moment by moment a reality mistakenly, as we talked about in the Wheel of Life teaching last winter course, and as I've underscored a bit in this course. So that's the goal, okay? That's the goal. That's what should be motivating you to do this exercise. Think of it as a game, as a challenge, a reasoning, sevenfold reasoning that we're going to explore is your opportunity to see if it's right. See if you can take the opposite position through analysis and discussion and reflection and meditation to find that maybe there is something that does inherently exist. But the goal is serious. And that's why I've spent so much time underscoring for all of you the reason why you might want to, take, valuable time, precious time. Most of us don't have a lot of time in our busy lives to explore this. I'm trying to establish a motivation and some reward, and goal that has some real has some real implications. It get real exciting, really, potentially, if you can change your reality on that level. So again, we've done some of these meditations already, but here we're going to formally proceed through the rest of this course, focused on using the specific stages and steps included in Master Chandrakirti's sevenfold reasoning. So I'm going to share those with you in a chart that I made up. And then, so I got to go back to screen share here. Again, so I got to find out where they are. Okay, let me put them up here. Here we go. Hopefully you're all still awake. So, okay, share screen. Here we go. All right. So what I have up here on the screen is what's called the sevenfold reasoning, and specifically as it applies to the aggregates of self. So that's why we start with the statement, I do not inherently, meaning the self, do not inherently exist because of. And then there's these 7 step process we go through in this analysis. And I'm going to give you an example in a minute. But the 7 are not being the aggregates, not being an entity other than the aggregates. Sound familiar? Those are the first two, the 2 choices I gave you a moment ago. And I argued it has to be one or the other. But then Chandrakirti gives us 5 more other meditations that we can do that underscore number 1 and 2, actually, even though they're listed as 3 through 7, and they're separate meditations. Their purpose is to really sort of combat any doubt that might remain after you do 1 and 2. So number 3 is not being the base of the aggregates, which is different, and we'll discover this when we look a little more closely at this versus number 1, for example. Number 4, not inherently being based on the aggregates. That kind of goes with number 3. They're like bookends. And number 5 is not inherently possessing the aggregates. Some of us might feel in our sense of self that we maybe just experienced in a meditation we did, that our sense of self is like we're possessing the aggregates, that we're some self-sufficient entity that essentially is using them or working with them temporarily while we're alive, because we all know that they don't last, we die at some point. And then number 6 is not being just the composite of the aggregates. That'll make a little bit more sense when we talk about that one and get into it. And then number 7, not being the shape of the aggregates. So that's the sevenfold reasoning. And I'll send this handout out to everybody. And I'll put it on the course webpage as we've done the other handouts. I'm going to share one other aspect, though, of the sevenfold reasoning with you practice. And these are what are called the 9 essentials or stages of practice in sevenfold reasoning. And they are part of what you do in this practice. So the first essential is the essential of ascertaining the object to be negated. That's what we did this morning in that meditation. Okay. It's number 1, as I alluded to. It's really the first one you should establish, and I babbled on about earlier, so I don't need to talk more about that. The second one is the essential of ascertaining the pervasions. We'll get into that more rather than talk about it out of context. Next one's the essential of realizing that the phenomena inputted is not the same as its basis of imputation. That has to do with like what we do with our thoughts. And as I was talking earlier about how we apply those to what we're interacting with moment by moment, dependently arising, whether it's one of our aggregates or all of our aggregates or even some other phenomena. Number 4 is the essential of realizing that the phenomena inputted is not different from its basis of imputation. It's supposed to be a comma. Do some credit, should be a lowercase e. Sorry, I have some typos in there. And number 5 is the essential of realizing that the phenomena inputted is not dependent on its basis of imputation. Number 6 is the essential of realizing that the phenomena inputted is not the support upon which its basis of imputation are dependent. This probably all just sort of sounds like it's kind of vague, but that's okay. This is this first like initial scratching the surface of your consciousness with the seed of these things. The essential, number 7 is the essential of realizing that the phenomena inputted does not possess its basis of imputation. Number 8 is the essential of realizing that the phenomena inputted is not the mere collection of its basis of imputation. And number 9 is the essential of realizing that the phenomena inputted is not the shape of its basis. So I'm not going to leave these up. I'm going to stop sharing because, again, they're really overviews and they'll have meaning and substance as we explore each one a little bit more. So what I want to do now, though, is take us into, now that we've identified, inherently existent self in that meditation practice we did earlier in this session, and we've established what meditative investigation really involves, and then that we have to basically ascertain that it must be either the same as or different from mind and body. Then we're going to embark on this set of meditations that I outlined there in the chart. So I'm going to go through another meditation, but rather than doing, in the interest of time, rather than going through the meditation in a meditation together as a group, I'm going to just walk through it and you guys can listen more reflectively. And of course, you can relax and put yourself in that sort of relaxed meditative state as much as you like. But rather than it being a formal meditative guide, then this is just to expose you to this sort of meditation. And then, of course, I'll provide it to you so you can be working with it over the next 2 weeks in the form of a document that gets put at the website. So it goes like this. In order to clarify what I've been explaining, for the sake of establishing that the self, we're really talking about the person here, is merely an imputation, as Jason Kappa talked about, that mere imputation of thought. I will show and explain an example external to a person. So here it is. And it will sound familiar relative to the outline of the 7-step reasoning, 7-fold reasoning meditation that I just ran through. A chariot is neither asserted to be other than its parts, nor non-other. It is not asserted to possess them. It is not in the parts, nor are the parts in it. It is not the mere collection of the parts, nor is it their shape. Just so should a yogi understand a person in its aggregates. So that's a simple meditation on a chariot that embodies the 7-fold reasoning. It's that succinct and efficient. One working with that is in a reflective and then a meditative session will come to comfort and realization of affirming those statements or having doubts and maybe wanting to challenge them. And that's what I'm looking for from you guys as we work our way through and get to the last session of this course in 2 weeks. So, basically Chandrakirti shows that if a yogi examines the basis of designation, in this case, a chariot, it could be a car. And as I mentioned earlier, it could be any object, external object, truly can. But in this case, a chariot that has wheels, axle, body, and so forth, that give rise to a designation chariot, he will be unable to find any chariot there. When we say that, he's talking about a self-existent chariot that exists on its own, from its own side. The only chariot, get this, this is really the point of the meditative investigation. The only chariot that does exist is the imputed or inputted chariot itself. It comes from our dependently arising with it. It cannot exist otherwise, inherently fixed permanently. So to formally just put that quickly into the 7 aspects of the 7-fold analysis, which I just shared with you on the screen a moment ago, it would go like this. You do that walk through the chariot or any other object narrative that I just read, and then you would think that this is what Chandrakirti through meditative investigation is purporting. Purporting what? That the only chariot that does exist is the inputted chariot coming from the mere imputation of our thoughts. Then one would briefly walk through the 7-fold analysis as it relates to the chariot as the following. There is no chariot which is other than its parts. There is no chariot which is the same as its parts. Number 3, there is no chariot which inherently possesses its parts. Number 4, there is no chariot which inherently depends on its parts. Number 5, there is no chariot upon which its parts are inherently dependent. Number 6, there is no chariot which is a mere collection of its parts. And finally, number 7, there is no chariot which is the shape of its parts. So the idea of sharing this exercise with you is to show you how you would work with the 7-fold analysis. Now, in the tail end of this session, if we have time, I'm going to show you a detailed meditation on the first one so that it isn't just as simple as rifling through them. And we'll do in the next session, the last session, a more detailed walk through each one of them in terms of what you're really exercising in the analysis. But fundamentally, I'm presenting you an outline of what is being done in your reflection on, and then further in your analytical meditation of. And once one comes to the same conclusion, if one comes to the same conclusion as Chandrakirti does, that it's nothing more, in this case, a chariot, in terms of existing as an inputted chariot, dependently arising in the moment by moment existence of what's coming from our thoughts. And that's the secret there. That's the secret to why I was babbling on about how important karmic predispositions are and why it's important to practice moment by moment virtuous activities versus non-virtuous activities because of what those predispositions lead to. So, if that's where we come to a conclusion of in meditation, that first half of a meditative process, then in the second half, you relax in that and you sit with that. You become familiar with it. And then you become one with it in the sense that it transforms the moment by moment experience that you're having. And every time you're having that moment by moment experience, first on the meditation cushion and then off the meditation cushion, you're planting enlightened seeds or wisdom filled versus misapprehended filled moment by moment experience of life. And that's exciting to me. So obviously the chariot could be the idea of no self, meaning a person, can be applied to the same analysis, that you can't, who can be found among or separate from his or her basis of designation, meaning the mental and physical aggregates of your own, his or her own continuum. When a person searches for that, just like we did through the 7-fold reasoning, just like we did with the chariot, you're not going to find it. So there's more I could say about that, but we'll get into more detail on that, but really this goes to what we talk about, that second step of meditative investigation, and then what do we actually do with that meditative investigation, meaning it is the self the same as or other than the collection of our aggregates. So state it like, these are just my narrative here in the lecture is really just to reinforce what I've been talking about. So if your mind tends to work sort of in a reasoned way that, is familiar with logic, for example, you can state this in the form of a consequence, concerning the person, it follows that it is not inherently existent because it does not exist in any of the 7 ways. That's my argument. So one can only say that, though, when one walks through the 7 ways. So these are statements to sort of give you some impetus to go ahead and try these. It's worth trying. These 7 ways are the 7 ways of existence, which are analyzed in the 3rd through the 9th essentials, that second chart I showed you. And we'll get more into that next week. And these are the ways that in which phenomena could be seen to inherently exist. There no other ways. So this is what we're trying to ascertain. That's what this is really all about. Whatever does not exist in any of these 7 ways, I contend, is necessarily non-inherently existent. That means that any phenomena which can be found to exist in one of these 7 ways must not be inherently existent. Put another way, it means that if a phenomena were inherently existent, it would have to exist in one of these 7 ways. So I might be twisting your brain a bit, but this is all the kind of single line statements that relate to like logical debate in on these topics from some of the traditions that come from Asia. But the whole thing is that you have to ascertain with conviction, remove that doubt, that if there is a phenomena that exists in the way in which it appears to exist to you normally, which was that first meditation we did today, it must exist in one of these 7 ways. If it doesn't exist inherently. So that's why we go through all these 7 options. So that concludes the lecture part of my presentation today. What I want to do is do one more meditation, and then I think we'll probably have a little bit more time to hopefully there's a few questions to explore. But what I want to do is go through the first meditation practice of the 7, which is establishing that the I is not my aggregates or is not my mind and body. So let's take a little bit more time with this. I won't rifle through it the way I did with the chariot. But again, I'm going to put the chariot in a document so that you can work with the chariot meditation at your own pace and in your own way. And then also, hopefully come up with some doubts maybe and questions. Because that I love that. I love questions and talking about, does this really work? So the first one will hopefully can go quickly. All of you, if you don't mind trying to make an effort, one more effort to sort of get into a comfortable meditative state for the next few minutes. Going back to that comfortable seated position, focusing in on your breath, first moving in your chest and abdomen, in and out, and then imagining your breath to become more refined, so that it has the ability to pervade your entire body. And that becomes so refined that it's able to pervade your body, where it has the transformative quality of actually creating a body of light. feel your body as light as that. Feel that your current concerns and mental states, good and bad, are sort of put off to the side or sort of dissolve in the light, at least temporarily for this this meditation, so that we have a clear mind. So with that clear mind, we'll establish through this guided meditation that the I is not mind and body, that the I is not the aggregates. First, the I is not the mental and physical aggregates, because then the assertion of an I would be senseless. I would be just another name for the aggregates. Next, the I is not the aggregates, because just as the aggregates are many, so the selves would be many. Or just as the I is one, so the aggregates would be one. Next, the I is not the aggregates, because the I would be produced and would disintegrate, just as the aggregates are produced and disintegrate. Further, the I is not inherently produced and does not inherently disintegrate, because if it did, memory of former moments of one's life would be impossible. For the two I's of the different moments would be unrelatedly different, because they would be inherently other. Next, the I is not inherently produced and does not inherently disintegrate, because then deeds done, in other words, karma, would be wasted, as there would be no transmission of the potencies accumulated from actions, since the eyes of the different moments of time would be unrelated others. And last, the I is not inherently produced and does not inherently disintegrate because the I would meet with the results of actions not done by itself. If, on the other hand, the potencies accumulated from actions were transmitted, an I which was totally different from the I that committed the deeds would undergo the results of those deeds. So these 6 examples for analysis are arguments for establishing that the I is not the aggregates. So slowly bring yourself back to the room. Bring yourself back to your coarse breath. Feel your breath moving in and out, moving your stomach and abdomen. And open your eyes and come back to the room. So it's a taste. I always try to say that in these meditations we've been doing thus far, it's meant to only be a taste of what you take onto the cushion. One would ideally take that those meditations and maybe work with each one of them individually. So you don't have to go through each one in, all of them in one session. Maybe take one. You only maybe need 10 minutes to just work with it. And since it's analytical meditation, don't hesitate to immediately upon arising in your mind some specific question or confusion or non-understanding of the statement, and write it down so that it can be revisited by you in reflection, maybe going back and listening to these classes again. And this is what I most encourage. Don't hesitate to contact me to discuss. Also, don't hesitate to bring it up as part of Q&A session. Don't hesitate to talk with each other about it. I mean, I know some of you know each other, so it's a really good thing to talk about these topics, which create further analysis, which create further perspective, which create further insight, which create further questions, which could create further doubts, which could create further investigation. And that's the idea. Try to bring it to life. So it's not taboo to be in a meditation session and then you have something hit you like boom, or gently, and then you want to write it down, stop, write it down. And maybe that could even be the end of that session if you get something like that out of it. Because, the wording of these are probably somewhat unfamiliar, and the being comfortable with the terminology and the supposition of the argument in terms of how the argument's being presented, the statement of consequence, right? It's a typical thing that's done in logical debate and in many systems of practice coming from Asia. So we're not, none of us, I don't think many of us are native to being Asian, and therefore wouldn't necessarily have a strong feeling for and comfort level with the way these things are put forth. And that's why I've tried to make some of my lectures sort of peppered with language and context that connect it more to our who we are, talking about mental afflictions as our normal mental states that we live in moment by moment as examples, and how this can affect our moment by moment reality. So what we'll do in the rest of these sessions, in the last session, I can't believe that there's only one more, is to try between now and then to work with this. I'll send this meditation. I'll send the chariot meditation as well, and work with the chariot meditation, or put it to an object that you know. Maybe it's a guitar, maybe it's it's a car. You don't have to use a chariot. Anything that you feel really well and you relate to, where you can analyze it in that way. Then maybe take and bring it to that outline walkthrough of the self. And then if you feel comfortable, you can bring it to a detailed walkthrough of each one of the 7 steps that Chandrakirti presents. And I just gave you the first one. Obviously, they're more detailed, and maybe make you go, what? Hold on, what? Maybe not. Maybe you guys are all more brilliant than me. It took me a long time to work with these meditations. So try to work with them, and then see where you go. But I then encourage you to try to allow for any moments of unclarity, whether it's in the form of a question, a doubt, etc. Like I said a moment ago, try to document that in some way, write it down or you record it, whatever, so that you can bring it to some context, discuss with your friends who are also in the class, discuss with me. I'm going to set up a couple of Zoom sessions between now and the last session, and then also after the last session, that are meant to be, this is something that I actually picked up from my daughter, Claire. She's going into this program. And one of the things they have in the program is they have office hours. So you can go to the office hour and talk about whatever you need to talk about, which might be helpful to you. So I'm like, why don't teachers do that in these kinds of teachings, So, I'm going to set up a few office hours, and anybody who's interested can come to that. I'll have Gloria put that information on the on the website listing for the class, and maybe that will be helpful. I'm just trying to create avenues for you to engage with me or with others. Could be the traditional Q&A, which I think we have some today. That's part of these sessions, or it could be separate from that. That's the point, with your friends or with me. So I'm going to set that up too. So let me see what questions might have come across the transom here while I was babbling on. Okay, first one is from Rachel. Do you think if human beings correctly apprehend what we actually are, non-self, there would be no development of civilization, culture, religion on planet Earth? I love that question. Good question. Absolutely not. There's two sides of the coin with this kind of realization, and one of them is what's called ultimate reality. Through these sort of explorations, we come in contact conceptually, not directly. There's a big difference, by the way, between conceptual and directly experiencing non-self. That is what we should be bringing off the cushion with us to inform our moment by moment, living, not where we should not be living, because that's the other side of the coin. The other side of the coin is what's called conventional or relative reality versus ultimate reality, which is, as much as we are identifying that which things are not inherently self-existing, please listen to what I'm going to say now. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. More importantly, it doesn't mean that it doesn't function. There is purpose and function to everything, every moment, every sentient being's existence, as we interact and exist together culturally, as civilizations, as religions, as any other type of human endeavor. And it goes to the heart of why we're here. It isn't to negate existence. It's to negate and work towards ending suffering existence, whereby suffering existence no longer exists, but that doesn't mean that existence doesn't exist, if you will. So this has to do with the two sides of the coin, so to speak, which are of the same nature ultimately, but conventional reality or relative reality does function, and it has great purpose in every moment. And that's part of what one should be able to discover through these kind of practices. And if it isn't apparent, it's part of what one might want to work towards, is keeping that question in your mind and looking for that in the evolution of experiencing non-self. And that kind of actually gets me to a question that was asked last week, before I go on to other questions, and I think it might have also been the same questioner, which the question, although I'm not repeating it directly, it had to do with what continues, or what's there if there isn't a self, and how does that maybe relate to the idea of a soul, or an essence. And so one of the things I didn't answer that question. I said, we'll get to that. So, which was, kind of like a cop out, but it really wasn't, because I could have answered it, but I wanted to really allow it to not be addressed until we moved a little further on. And your question today, as you just proposed it, sort of connects to that question. And I wanted to address that. In this sort of cosmology, let me be clear, it isn't that one does not exist and that there isn't something that continues, is maybe the way to put it. If that wasn't the case, and not that, when we talk about karma in traditional systems that come from the East, for example, there's a belief in reincarnation, that lifetimes continue. Not necessarily in some of the Western traditions that some of us might be part of. But if that system of belief that we're exploring today, the non-self, had as its reality that there wasn't something that continued, that blows that all up, doesn't it? Reincarnation isn't possible. The continuation of life isn't possible. But what we're exploring here, as I've said a couple of times now, isn't the negation of the self, in the sense that there's nothing there, that it's nihilistic in its viewpoint, but rather that there are what we call karmically contributing factors to the experience of kleshas being planted in thought, speech, and action every single moment. Their contributing causes come from our existing in relative normal, conventional, ordinary reality. Breathing, living beings that have 5 aggregates. And they're the vehicle, if you will, for that sort of experience, that sort of karmic experience. Those are called like contributing causes. What underlies that is what's called in this cosmology gross consciousness, or gross level consciousness. I will say that those contributing causes, the ordinary aggregates of conventional life, in the gross level consciousness, those are not transformed in the process. They don't continue. We could see that when a person dies. Yeah. What does continue is the substantial cause. The substantial cause is that seed being carried in this subtle consciousness, those seeds being carried in the subtle consciousness that have the potential to be transformed. And that goes to that question that in this system, that goes, I think, to that question that you asked last class, And again, I apologize. I think it came from the same questioner. Hopefully she doesn't mind me identifying her because it's in the chat, which was Rachel. And we could talk more about that and revisit that a little bit more if we have time, maybe at the beginning of the next session. So let me just read the next question, though. It says here, what is the source of Jason Kappa's quote, merely by the power of thought? Yeah, let's see if I can tell you that, Richard. Yeah, see. Look up my notes. That comes from the same as the first quote that I mentioned, which is illumination of the thought. So I could provide you more information on where to get that as well in terms of the context where I pull this, offline, if you will. And then Richard also asked the question, can you define base? So I kept talking about, I think Richard's returning about the basis of imputation or the base of imputation. So what I'm talking about there is the object of our meditation, which are the 5 aggregates. They are a base of imputation in the sense that we're applying the meditative analysis to how do we arise in connection with that base of experience. For example, some of you will know this, like from Tantra. We always talk about the base, and then the path, and then the result. So the base in that context is our ordinary self. It's no different here. The base is our ordinary self in the form of the 5 aggregates. And as I said a moment ago, those are a vehicle for contributing factors of doing these practices. Do they continue? Like I said in the last answer, no. They're gross level substances, and so they don't continue. But the blessing of being human and living in this kind of existence is that they can be used as a vehicle for practice. So they become the base, but they're not what we're trying to negate. We're trying to negate the conception that they self-inherently exist, not that they don't exist, but that's what we're talking about in terms of the base. And another question here, would success in today's meditation indicate that we discover true self? And I'm not sure which meditation we're talking about. The first one. So no, not so much. It's that what we're trying to find in that first meditation is our false sense of self that we take for granted. And the idea is that, as I said at the end of that meditation, we are actually affirming when we get to the end of that meditation that a true self-existent self does exist, as we normally have habitually always experienced it. And we're only trying to establish it so that we can hold that and use that as our analysis of what we want to look at as an object to be negated, that it doesn't actually exist. That's what we're trying to negate. And that was my ramble early on, was that without knowing what we're looking at, what we're trying to negate, then it's kind of difficult to hold on to it. So what we're discovering in that first meditation is the false self, not the true self, if you will, so that we can hold it and use it in our analysis to say, is that not really a true self? Is that really a false self? Is that really a non-self? Is that really selflessness? Or does it really inherently exist? I mean, that's what all these meditations are about that we're about to embark on, and a little bit what we did in those first 5 meditations. So the next question here comes from, do we ever do the exercise for one of the very few things that does inherently exist, like space, to contrast with all the things that do not inherently exist? That's a really great question. In certain practices coming from Asia, again, especially in Buddhism, there's always there's the presence of trying to conceptually present like what does exist permanently that is not changing. And so traditionally there's this analogy with space, and in Buddhism, that lack of inherent existence is they use a word that identifies that, and it's called emptiness. And that word associated with space, you can maybe kind of see why that would be brought up as a, like, emptiness is like space. And there are meditations in and around that. But in this practice that we're doing here, so the answer to that question, Karen, is that there are exercises and meditations for that, but not in the sevenfold reasoning set of meditations that we're doing here. And this is using, get this is really important. This sevenfold reasoning is a process of negating, of eliminating what self might be, not affirming what self is or non-self is. It's like, okay, if it isn't this, then it has to be non-self. That goes to my in my lecture earlier about how this set of meditation practices infers, it directly infers non-self. It doesn't establish it any other way. And that's kind of hard to get because we don't normally do that. And it's one of the characteristics of this type of practice that exists in specifically in Prasangika Mahayana Buddhism. So you don't have to write that down, but that's really, this is like sort of trying to get used to sort of a new way of letting your mind flow. So we're not doing an affirmation like this is like this, like, you know, so you won't see that sort of using that sort of technique, that meditative technique of space, but not that it doesn't have its place, but that it doesn't have its place in this particular set of exercises. Hopefully that works for you. And David asks, I wonder, to what true self do you refer? Well, that's a good question. It's part of what we get to, as I was just rambling a moment ago about, which is when we go through these meditation practices, through the process of doing these analysis and then having confidence in the results of negating that the self is the aggregates and at the same time not other than the aggregates. Remember the two choices of meditative investigation. That reveals itself. It isn't something that you put a positive definition to. So when you ask, like, I wonder, to what true self do you refer? It's really the true nature of existence. And we're part of existence. So it's us, it's all phenomena. Hopefully that helps.
Enough.
Okay. So, and then Richard asked, would I be kind to send us the 9 essentials also? Yeah, that's in the same handout. So it's labeled as handout number 2 or 3. And that will be sent to you guys, and put on the website, you know, and I'll send it to most of you who I have your emails. Okay, then the next question was from Karen. Would it oversimplify to say that though these practices, the bottom line is to view ourself and all phenomena as mere name and just thoughts? Well, there's 2 answers. One is that's not an oversimplification on one level, but in the system of practice that we're doing here, and I really want to underscore this, in the tradition of so many of the traditions that this is connected to, that's not good enough. And what I mean by that is that the process of analysis of eliminating and negating all other possibilities is what would be the firm undergirth and foundation of reaching the conclusion of what you're simply stating in your question. And what Jason Kappa states in that quote, that merely by power of thought. You know, in this tradition that I'm bringing this practice to you from, it is the lazy, cheap way to just say that and not be able to back it up. All the scholars, all the yogis, all the practitioners stand there and go, tell me another way that it could be. And then they go boom, 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 meaning they knock it down, knock it down, knock it down, knock it down. And they don't knock it down, knock it down. Those are blessings that they've had over centuries of practice to analyze other views of the true nature of reality and to show through this analytical process of reasoning that that's not true. That's not true. That's not true. And that's where you remove that doubt and you can stand. When you can reach the point through practice of firmly standing on the quote, it's only by the mere power of thought that something's established, then it better be informed with all that. Otherwise, it's kind of like not thought to be on solid ground, shaky, have lots of doubts. You talk to people, they can knock you down so fast on that because they've got solid positions that are pretty, have a lot of integrity. If we went into a whole class on all the schools of Buddhism and other schools that are non-Buddhist that come from the East that have this concept of non-self, that's not the conclusion, you could get knocked down so easy. So it's not, so that's two answers, right? The answer is yes, it's not oversimplification, but I highly, highly encourage you not to just rest in that for everything, all the reasons I just said. Okay, I'll try to, David, if you want to send me your email directly. I'll try to copy it now. It's kind of hard for me to do this while I'm teaching, but if you want to, I gave my email out last class. Oh, I got it now. So I'll add you to the list, because I got your email, your chat note there. Let me just try to move on because there are a few others. A great quote from His Holiness. That's true. Karen, okay. The last thing I have up here is in the meditation looking for the self, you mentioned water into milk and then water into water. Can you say what the two, these are metaphors for referring to? Yeah. In the early process, the process of exploring, identifying a self, when you start to entertain for the purposes of, again, as I answered to Rachel's question earlier, the purposes of meditations is to establish the mistaken identity of ourselves with the aggregates. While you're in the process of that, it becomes like putting water into milk, meaning it's not crystal clear, meaning the aggregates aren't crystal clear that you, the water, or vice versa, are the same, and that's where you could find the self. But then as you develop the meditations further, and I'll forward these meditations to you that have those guided quotes from His Holiness, the seventh Dalai Lama, and also from a few others too that I didn't read from Jason Kappa and Chandra Kirti. You'll see that once you get that firm conviction that, yes, I am inherently self-existent, again, which is mistaken, but you're identifying with it so you can know the object you're looking at through all of these. Think of yourself as playing devil's advocate, right? When you are able to establish that you identify with this, then it's like pouring water into water. By the way, the same metaphor is used when you talk about seeing the true nature of reality directly. It's like pouring water into water. So that's the flip side of it. So really what we're talking about here is that. But I encourage you to develop sort of a tenor in these practices to establish that a self does exist. You don't even have to believe it. You might be around the corner already where you don't believe it, but use the motivation to say that once really knowing what that means to have that mistaken identity of self, use it to play devil's advocate. Be the jerk on the block who says, I don't believe that. Put me through your arguments. I'll do it. I'll go through and I'll find the self. I will. And then try to find it. Do your best. And then be humbled at the end if you're not able to find the self. So then that kind of is talking about those kind of things. It covers all the do you have are there any other questions somebody might have in the room that you want to, say out loud? That's okay too. We're a little past the end of the class, so hopefully I answered everybody's questions. I'm sorry if the session today got into, I try to cover a lot, but in 4 2-hour sessions covering this topic the way I want to, there's a lot to cover. So I'm grateful that DNKL is recording them. And then, I encourage you guys, if you can put up listening to me some more, go back and listen to things that maybe might be helpful. And then I will get those handouts put on the website, and we'll move forward for the next session with everything. So that's it for today. Yay. Okay. So I will end the session though with my dedication, if you don't mind. By the goodness of the deed I have just done, may all sentient beings complete the collection of merit and wisdom, and thus gain the ultimate bodies that wisdom and merit make. May what I've learned here today be wholly dedicated to the future well-being and happiness of all sentient beings, where there is no longer any suffering existence and only happiness and endless joy. Yay, that would be great. I'm all for it. All right. Yep. Let's do that. Okay. So we're done. I hope to see all you guys next week or 2 weeks, on March 20th. That will be our last hurrah. And I will post office hours through the website. I'll give them to Gloria later so she can have them up there tomorrow. That will just be some intermittent times between now and next session. And I encourage you guys to do what you did today. We had a lot of questions, more than we ever had in the previous session. So yay for that too. Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John.